Hey there guys, today I want to address a specific use case in the ayahuasca community. I want to address the people who drank ayahuasca and felt something real happen, but soon after ceremony, the thing you were wanting healing with returned, and maybe it came back even worse than before. I'm talking to people who did have real psychedelic experiences, but the benefits faded for some reason, and you're a bit confused about why. You may have felt something really deep in ceremony. Maybe it was even the most profound night of your life. You may have been inspired. You probably saw things. You may have even understood things about yourself that you never even knew were there to be seen. But then you went back home, back to day-to-day life, away from ceremony and dieta and the adventure of it all. And a few months later, maybe even weeks later, you noticed some of the benefits and teaching stuck and some of them didn't. The thing you actually went there for to heal, so the anxiety, the behavioral pattern, the addiction, the relationship you wanted to heal from, whatever it was, it's still an issue. It's still there, basically unchanged. Maybe it's even more intense than before. I was also that person, and what I've found since then, it's been almost 10 years, has actually changed how I think about alternative healing modalities in general, not just for myself, but for also now the people that I work with. So let's dive into this video. Okay, so if you go looking for why healing can fade in the online ayahuasca community, you'll find no shortage of people willing to explain it to you. But most of what's out there falls into a small handful of unactionable, vague buckets, as I would say. And I want to identify them because I'm going to present a method to you later in this video that can actually give you actionable steps if you're in this position, instead of vague platitudes. So let's see what the standard responses are to a failed healing, so to speak, from the ayahuasca community. I've grouped them into four main buckets or categories. Bucket number one is people say things like you weren't committed enough, you didn't prepare properly, and there's real truth in this, but it also puts the entire burden back on you, as if somehow like showing up more seriously would automatically produce the exact healing that you needed. It usually doesn't work that cleanly. I know this from experience. I did that back in 2019. Bucket number two is things like it wasn't the right time, you weren't ready, your beliefs were blocking you, trust in the divine timing of things. Bucket number three is from like a more clinical or therapeutic direction. People say things like you shouldn't even use external substances and that all real healing is entirely internal, self-directed analysis at your shadow. You know, some people say those things. And bucket four is just like a quiet resignation. People say things like it heals some things and not others. What are you going to do? They shrug their shoulders and literally that's it. These people have, in the fourth category, these people have yet to learn that they are falling victim to a kind of inaccuracy that ayahuasca as a healing modality lacks. Now, none of the above buckets or platitudes, as I call them, none of them are lies. I think they're all partially true sometimes, but none of them actually tell you what to do. And if you're actively on the healing path and trying to heal, these kinds of platitudes can really derail you. That's the gap that I want to address in this video. Telling someone vaguely why they weren't ready isn't really an answer. As healers and spiritual practitioners, we can do better than this. And I have some actionable steps you can do if you're in this situation. Let's do a deeper dive on bucket number two because it's the most common one and it's worth understanding exactly why it gets said so often. So bucket number two was you weren't ready yet. And I'm saying that this is a platitude. And I want to be precise about what this word means because a platitude is not just a vague statement. Specifically, it's a statement that sounds meaningful and true on the surface. It's also nearly impossible to disagree with, which is actually why it kind of sounds so wise when you first hear it. It also gives you zero next actionable step. And it lets the person saying it sound knowledgeable while what they're actually communicating is, I don't know. Now, I don't think most people saying this are deliberately being dishonest. I think a lot of the time they genuinely can't pinpoint what was specifically missing for you, and you weren't ready or divine timing isn't with you is just a much easier thing to say than I don't know, I'm not sure. But notice what these phrases, these platitudes can't do. They don't explain what actually needs to change in order for you to heal. And I'm going to add some more nuance here because I don't want to just dismiss this as these phrases as spiritual nonsense that would actually be inaccurate. These phrases can be a platitude at the same time as they contain some real truth. There are times when we genuinely aren't ready to receive a certain healing. For example, a trauma can be so deeply subconscious, so painful that bringing it up without real preparation beforehand just isn't advisable. Or we simply haven't done enough work on a pattern yet to finally be done with it. Hint, forgiveness and acceptance are really key factors to be able to sort of finally be done with some of these issues, but that's something for another video. So the issue was never that readiness is a made-up idea. The issue is what happens next. Give me details. The difference between what these people are saying and what I'm saying is this. There's a middle ground, a place where you can know in real detail exactly which patterns need work, both in ceremony and in the time between ceremonies, instead of guessing and leaving it to divine timing. Because there are actual methods for figuring out where your healing needs to be directed specifically. These methods don't magically cure the issue on their own overnight. What they do is far more useful than that. They tell you something concrete, something like this pattern of behavior needs addressing because it's connected to this piece of, or connected to this specific trauma that you experienced. Or this emotion needs balancing with an experience of love or safety or grounding. These are real specific direction for you, not a feeling you're supposed to just wait around for. And for people who have had ceremonies before, you can start to see how this specificity can work in with you developing a specific intention for your next ceremony. Now, I've developed this approach through pattern recognition and direct experience across both worlds. I've drunk ayahuasca 9 times in Peru, Pucallpa, Peru, if you know that, in the Shipibo tradition. And separately, I've given Reiki to more than 40 people. Combining those two disciplines is how I've been able to make this whole process far more accurate. There is a large amount of crossover between what the Reiki community is trying to heal and what the ayahuasca community is trying to heal. And here's the real cost of relying on you weren't ready instead of something more concrete like I'm proposing. These platitudes, they're stories that explain after the fact why healing didn't happen. They aren't maps of what's actually missing from your own internal work, before ceremony or between ceremonies. And because it's largely just a story, it's entirely possible you go back a year after your first ceremonies and the exact same thing happens. The healing you were hoping for slips past you again. Not because it wasn't your time, because in that year nobody actually mapped out what you specifically needed to work on. So you walked back into ceremony with the same vague intentions and the same vague hope that it would somehow all come together this time. So I'm here to say that it doesn't have to be this hit or miss. Your specific issues can be understood before ceremony and worked on directly in relation to intentions you've actually built, not ones you're hoping will occur to you in the moment or are generic and given to you as a stop, as a placeholder, right? I'm going to show you exactly how with real examples later in this video. Okay, so there's another critique as well, which is a more clinical therapy-based point of view from certain sort of thoughtful therapists who have also sat in ayahuasca ceremony before. But these people have come out the other side saying, just don't use ayahuasca at all. And they say things like healing should be like completely an inside job, full stop. They tend to think that like reaching outside of yourself with external substances sends a message to your psyche that you can't do it on your own. And to be fair, there is some wisdom here. A lot of people go into ceremony thinking that the medicine will do the work for them, right? That ayahuasca is like a magic pill or something, without ever having done the internal work themselves. And that can become a kind of like outsourcing or like a healing fantasy, so to speak, right? But I think this view, it throws out something which is actually genuinely valuable for a lot of us. And that is that the answer isn't to like never use ayahuasca as a tool or psychedelics generally. It's do the internal mapping first so you know what patterns and healings you're specifically working with, and then take that clarity into your ayahuasca ceremony where ayahuasca can kind of do its thing and provide its healing very specifically, right? With the structure of like your knowledge plus specific intentions, providing the healing that only ayahuasca can provide, right? Like healing for trauma, addiction, anxiety, PTSD. And so basically this is kind of like marrying two worlds together, right? Like the best of both worlds. So here's what I think is really going on underneath all four buckets or explanations, as I mentioned earlier, which the ayahuasca community gives as explanations as to why you haven't got the healing that you were after. It's not that you weren't committed. It's not that it wasn't your time. Not that substances can't help. It's that in almost every single ceremonial setting, nobody in the room actually knows very specifically what needs healing with you personally. Not the shaman, not the facilitator, often not even you, at least consciously. That's because ceremonies aren't personalized diagnostic processes, right? People show up and they receive whatever comes through oftentimes. Sometimes that's exactly what you needed. Oftentimes the actual root of what's bothering you never gets directly addressed because nobody knew to ask for it. It's fairly hit and miss this way. Now here's the insight I want to impart on you. Psychedelic healing doesn't have to be guesswork. It can be far more precise without promising you a magical outcome, because nobody actually can. What it takes is doing some work before the ceremony to actually know what you're working with in terms of your own patterns, and that's what we're going to talk about now. Okay, so there's another critique as well, which is a more clinical therapy-based point of view from certain sort of thoughtful therapists who have also sat in ayahuasca ceremony before. But these people have come out the other side saying, just don't use ayahuasca at all. And they say things like healing should be like completely an inside job, full stop. They tend to think that like reaching outside of yourself with external substances sends a message to your psyche that you can't do it on your own. And to be fair, there is some wisdom here. A lot of people go into ceremony thinking that the medicine will do the work for them, right? That ayahuasca is like a magic pill or something, without ever having done the internal work themselves. And that can become a kind of like outsourcing or like a healing fantasy, so to speak, right? But I think this view, it throws out something which is actually genuinely valuable for a lot of us. And that is that the answer isn't to like never use ayahuasca as a tool or psychedelics generally. It's do the internal mapping first so you know what patterns and healings you're specifically working with, and then take that clarity into your ayahuasca ceremony where ayahuasca can kind of do its thing and provide its healing very specifically, right? With the structure of like your knowledge plus specific intentions, providing the healing that only ayahuasca can provide, right? Like healing for trauma, addiction, anxiety, PTSD. And so basically this is kind of like marrying two worlds together, right? Like the best of both worlds. Okay, so here's what a mapping session actually looks like. I keep talking about mapping patterns and internal trauma in this video, so let's actually get specific about what that means and how I do it. Let me walk you through something close to a real session. Details have been changed, obviously, and blended to keep it private, but the shape of it is very real. We start with a conversation across what I call 4 planes: the physical, emotional, psychological, and the spiritual. I'll usually also ask about parts of your life history, traumas and experience that have shaped the specific kind of healing that you're going to need. This isn't therapy in the traditional sense. It's closer to tracing where issues are actually showing up in your body's energetic fields, or some say aura. Some people I've done this with have said it feels like therapy because subconscious patterns get illuminated, so to speak, to them in real time as I explain what I'm seeing. But it's really a simplified cross-section of your energetic system, your chakras, and the layers of your aura. Your energy system is made up of 2 main things: chakras, which act like pumps, moving energy through the whole system, and layers, which represent different physical and metaphysical aspects of yourself, almost like a small model of the universe. So once we've gone through the 4 planes, I can, based on doing this over 40 times, now I can see which chakras are blocked, why, and which parts of your energy field need Reiki attention. Now, if you're planning to use these insights for psychedelic work, the patterns that come out of the mapping become the basis for your intentions and for what to work on in the time in between your psychedelic sessions. That's where journaling comes in. Using the protocol I've developed, journaling between your psychedelic sessions helps you surface and work through more of what's underneath in the subconscious, so that when you go into ceremony, you receive healing in proportion to the work you've actually done. This is what I mean when I say ayahuasca isn't a magic pill. Some things it can heal right away, and others take real time as you work through them yourself. This is exactly the part the ayahuasca community tends to sweep under the rug with phrases like, "you weren't ready." Structured journaling alongside a mapping session is how you actually get ready. Now let me walk you through what this actually looks like using an example from someone I did this exact process with. The goal being to use what surfaced to build real psychedelic intentions for their upcoming sessions. On the physical plane, this person had ongoing tension on one side of their neck and shoulder and tightness through one hip and leg. Nothing dramatic on its own, but working through it, that side of the body connected to something specific, unexpressed material involving a parent, repression, and a pattern of carrying too much weight, physically and relationally, without support underneath it. Now here's a pattern I use often. If you have chronic pain or keep getting injured on one particular side of your body, it can point to which parental relationship is behind it. Left side means maternal. Right side means paternal. It's held up consistently in my experience over 40 different people in my Reiki practice. On the emotional plane, we found real grief, the end of a relationship with someone who struggled with addiction. That's where the grief came from. Tangled up with guilt about how it ended and a deeper loneliness that actually went back much further than that relationship, all the way to childhood. On the psychological plane, anxiety, overthinking, and a real difficulty holding boundaries. This person described themselves as too empathetic, which once we looked closer turned out to be a story covering for not feeling safe, saying no. Alongside that, a pattern of taking on excessive responsibility, both for themselves and for other people's emotions. And on the spiritual plane, mapped onto the body's energy centers, a blocked throat chakra, specifically around speaking hard truths to one parent in particular, a heart chakra carrying grief and a sense of not being consistently supported, a root chakra that never quite felt grounded, going back to an unstable early home life. The boundary issues specifically trace to the rare aspect of the chakras, what I think of as the will centers. When we struggle to speak up or hold a boundary, that's often where the blockage shows up. Here's where it becomes something you can actually use. Once all of that is laid out together, patterns emerge that were invisible before. In this case, a pattern of learning weak boundaries from watching one parent enable another, a pattern where expressing anger or disappointment as a child felt dangerous, so it got buried, and still gets buried today. A pattern of I have to do everything myself because people let me down, and an unfinished, unspoken truth with a parent that's never actually been said out loud. Now that's 5 specific nameable things, not you have some blockages or you weren't ready or divine timing or whatever people tell you. And honestly, I think that kind of explanation just doesn't hold up once you've seen what's actually possible to find. 5 real threads, each traceable to an actual memory, each still visibly running in that person's life today. And from there, the next step is exactly what I talked about earlier, turning those threads into real intentions, not give me healing, specific requests, a balancing experience for the distrust, a balancing experience for the grief, the guilt, the loneliness, help feeling grounded and safe in the body, help expressing a boundary that's never been spoken before. That's the actual difference. Walking into ceremony hoping something helps versus walking in with a map. Now, alongside that, I give people structured journaling prompts to work through between sessions. Not journal about your feelings in some vague way, but prompts that trace each pattern back to its earliest memory, how it shows up today, and what responding differently would actually look like. That's what keeps a pattern in view long enough to really integrate it, instead of glimpsing it once and then losing track of it again. Patterns like this need time to surface properly and be worked through thoroughly. In neuroscience, that's often put at around 60 days. In my experience, it tends to land closer to 50, but the exact number matters less than giving it real time. Okay, here's what I actually do. I come from a slightly unusual healing background. I've sat in ayahuasca ceremony myself, including heroic doses of, as I mentioned, ayahuasca and also psilocybin. And separately, I trained as a Reiki practitioner to the master level. And I've now worked with over 40 people doing this kind of subconscious pattern mapping work. Okay, a little bit about what I actually do. Now, I come from a slightly unusual healing background. I've sat in ceremony myself, including heroic doses of both ayahuasca and psilocybin. And separately, I trained as a Reiki practitioner to the master level. At this point, I've now worked with over 40 different people doing this kind of subconscious pattern mapping work. And what I noticed over that time doing both is that these two worlds almost never talk to each other, even though they're trying to solve a lot of the same problems. So that's what I built. It's called a 4 planes mapping session. It's about 2 hours, priced specifically to keep it accessible. It's not a huge commitment. We go through your history across those 4 planes that I mentioned and find the specific patterns actually running underneath whatever you've been trying to heal, the way I just walked you through. Now from there, you've got real options. Journal on it with a specific and structured protocol that I give you, or come back for Reiki and work directly on it. After all, Reiki is a fully fledged healing system unto itself. Or take those specific learnings and turn them into real specific intentions for your next ayahuasca ceremony. So if you've had a genuinely powerful ayahuasca experience and some real part of you feels different, but the thing you actually went there for is still sitting exactly where it was 6 months or a year later, I don't think that means that you failed, and I don't think it means you weren't ready. I think it means nobody in the process had a way to show you that specifically you needed to work on certain things. That's the gap I'm trying to fill. Not instead of ceremony, right? We're not trying to replace ceremony. What we're trying to do is work alongside it as the map that was missing from your healing adventure and journey. And it is those things, very much so, right? It is an adventure and a journey. So if that's where you're at, the link's below. 2 hours, priced low, and a genuinely good place to start figuring out what's actually been sitting underneath all of this.